Welcome, dear friends. We're getting into an interesting topic today, so get prepared and settle down, and let's jump right into it. So, today's topic is a very simple question, but extremely profound in its answer, and it is, what is consciousness? Another way to formulate this question would be, what is God? Or what is existence? Or who am I? Um, these are all very uncommon questions to ask common people, because usually nobody would care about it, and just, you know, because it's so in the background. Um, but let me explain. So, the question forms itself into, what is life? Or what's the present moment? How can we define it? And the definition that I came up with is basically separating the universe into the only two things that can really, like, if you want to separate the universe into two things, it would be these two. So on one hand, we have the experiencer, which is consciousness, and on the other hand, we have the thing that can be experienced. So everything else, basically everything. You'll get a more clear picture of what I mean by this as we go on. So, we have on one hand the outside world, which is the world of physical matter and things that can be perceived by consciousness. And the we can know that these two things are not the same, because you cannot perceive the thing that you are. Like an eye cannot see itself. A camera cannot film itself. Of course, people would say now, yeah, you can look in the mirror, but you're not seeing yourself. You're actually just seeing a reflection of yourself. So we have these two things. And the question of who are we of both is just a question of what you want to identify with. So we have a consciousness within us that enables perception, because um, because it is just consciousness, you cannot perceive it. That's the tricky part about it that people don't get, which is that they try to figure out what they are, what our soul is, or whatever, what the inside person is, but they try to look at the physical body, and you cannot really find it there. So it's because of the reason that everything is basically made out of atoms, and we say consciousness is only in life. So only life has consciousness, only biological beings. And we think biology is consciousness, and everything else does not have that consciousness within it that enables it to perceive. So let me put it this way. Your eyes see an image. They have signals that they get, light gets reflected from other objects, gets into our eye, into the lens, and then some signals go out to the brain and, create the image of sorts. But where do we actually see that image? Because if it's only information in our brain, how can it be that we see an image and a color? If it would be just information being progressed, then we wouldn't even notice it. It would just happen, and our brain would shoot out a reaction to it. For example, you see an insect flying towards you, you duck. But what's the thing that sees that and sees the image itself and doesn't just react to it? And this very thing is consciousness. And it can only be known by knowing that you can see. You cannot see it. You cannot find consciousness. You cannot say, oh, there it is. Because that would be just consciousness perceiving something. And if consciousness perceives something, it cannot be it. That's like walking around in the world and seeing whatever, a tree, and saying, oh, I'm the tree. But, you know, this is the tricky part about it. This is why it's so difficult to understand for people. But don't be hard on yourself right now. Like, this is a complicated topic. It's complicated because it's actually so simple and obvious that we never see it, like a fish in water. But most people would, just close the video right now and say, fuck it, I don't care, and be angry. It's like, dude, why you're angry? That's another topic. So we know now there's two things in the universe, which is the things that can be perceived and the thing that perceives itself. The thing itself that perceives. And because this consciousness is not a thing, this is the reason why it's so hard to understand for science. Or this is rather the biggest obstacle of science, that they try to look inside of the body for the source of consciousness, and this is not the place you're going to find it. Because if we say the physical body and the brain and our nervous system is where the conscious perceiver lives in, so our soul lives in, the living spark that differentiates us from physical matter, then you would quickly realize that we are completely made out of physical atoms. Like the entire rest of the universe. There's nothing inside of us that is inherently different than the earth we walk on, the air we breathe, the water we drink, or the sunlight we receive. And in fact, we're actually made out of these four things. The plants that we either eat or nurture the animals that we eat are physically consisting out of earth. They grow out of it. All their substance is made out of earth. And when they die, they dissolve back into earth. They are filled with water. They receive sun energy. And they consume oxygen or dioxide, whatever. They basically breathe. And then we eat that physical matter, and our bodies process it, and it becomes the very substance that we consist out of. And then suddenly it's supposed to be constructed in a certain way that makes it have consciousness. This is like building a machine out of these four elements and saying when we combine it in a different way and we build it up in a different way or in a certain way, then suddenly it would have consciousness and be alive. This is like Master Geppetto building Pinocchio, and suddenly that thing is alive, just in a more complicated way, but you clearly can see that we are made out of physical matter. We are just atoms. So what then the scientist or the rationally minded person doesn't want to admit or combine or cannot put in their head and wrap their mind around is, does a stone then have consciousness? Is that what you're trying to say? And then they, I don't know, throw a stone on the floor and say, ha, you see? It didn't say ouch. It doesn't have consciousness. And it just makes you see that people are identified with their thoughts and their emotions and everything, and they think that is what they are. But as we noticed earlier, you cannot be something that you are perceiving, because the very nature of perception is that you perceive something in your environment. You cannot perceive yourself, just as the eye cannot look back at itself. So what are we? Are we dead? Are we alive? Are we physical matter? Are we just flesh? Or are we, living sentient beings? And the answer is, both is true. If we say we're only physical matter that is constructed in a certain way that is able to react to its environment emotionally, like for example something bad for our survival happens, it creates a certain nerve activity in us that is basically an emotion of, I don't know, sadness or whatever, or happiness, not always bad ones. Or are we just that physical matter that cannot perceive anything and is basically dead? So there's no escaping out of this. Either we have to admit that everything is alive and everything has consciousness, but not necessarily thoughts and feelings, and a will to survive and a reproductive cycle, or we say we are dead, and but clearly, I mean, you can judge by your first-hand experience, you are alive and you are perceiving. So there must be some consciousness inside that is still seeing everything. There's a soul. There's somebody inside watching, feeling, and all of that. And that thing is within everything else around us. So the consciousness within us perceives the thoughts and emotions that circulate in our body and our brain and our minds. So a stone does not have a brain. It doesn't have a body. It doesn't have a sexual drive. It doesn't reproduce or whatever. But that consciousness that perceives what's happening inside of the stone is still there. And that consciousness does not judge, because our emotions and the biological being within us judges and perceives emotions and says this is a good one, this is a bad one, and everything. But consciousness is just perception. And this judgeless perception without any emotions attached to it or thoughts, this very thing is inside of all physical matter, everything. Stones, plants, whatever. All the physical matter that exists inside the entire universe. So this is some pretty trippy shit, if you ask me. Like imagining that everything around you is alive, but be careful that you don't go into the what does the stone think phase, because people get into this immediately because they still think of it as, oh, he has an ego, he has a will to survive, he has emotions and feelings and stuff like this, and he cares, and he when I when I offend him or whatever, some shit like that. Don't go into that. Don't go into that. Yeah. So how can we define this pure consciousness that is just perception, basically, or it's rather the ability to perceive? But in a stone, there's not much happening. You know, I don't know if you were ever in a stone, or if you looked inside of a stone, but unless you opened it and cracked it on the floor, nothing in there was happening, nothing was moving. And this is why the stone does not have emotions or some shit, and feelings, and cares about what happens to him, or even can say ouch. That's just silly. And there I'm completely with the rationally mind people that say a stone doesn't have that. But it does have that quality of consciousness. That's an important part. So now we know consciousness and the things that consciousness perceives are not the same. And we know that all physical matter has consciousness. And our human experience is actually a combination of both. We have a physical body that reproduces itself, that recreates itself. You don't have to do anything about it. You don't have to care about it for it to sustain itself. And notice how everything in your life is basically automatic. Like, we have the drive to go out and eat, or to do whatever, or to reproduce, or something like that. But we are just basically the thing that we really are inside is only the thing that is perceiving it. Because if everything inside of the universe would have happened exactly the same way as it did 4.5 billion years ago, when biological life started existing on Earth, there would be no other way than for it to happen exactly as it did happen. Like there was water on Earth, and underground volcanoes, and gases and chemicals and everything, and this soup suddenly created life. And that life started reproducing itself. And at some point, there must have been a transition from just physical matter to biological life. And in between there was a transition, but could that transition have made consciousness happen? Could it produce consciousness? So you have basically dead physical matter that is just gas and water and whatever, and when it gets combined in a certain way, suddenly it should have consciousness and an inside to it that cannot be seen from the outside, because you cannot see the consciousness of a person from the outside. We can only know it from within. You only can see the consciousness within you, or you can only perceive or know the consciousness within you. You don't know, basically everybody in your life could be a robot and you wouldn't notice. You only know because you're inside that you are alive. So inside of that first life that was made from physical matter and then procreated, that was all automatic. Like if the gases and the water and all the conditions were the same from the beginning, could it actually not have happened that life exists? No. It was a chemical reaction that happened because the circumstances were such, and it had no other choice but to be like that. And after that, everything happened automatic. DNA, I don't know if you have control over your DNA and your cellular activities, but I don't think you have conscious control of that. You cannot say, okay, now stop reproducing my cells. You can kill yourself, but that's not really getting inside of the cell and saying stop. So everything happens automatic. Your thoughts just arise. You never know what thought is going to come next. You cannot control your feelings. They just go through you. You can only perceive them. And our brains, just because we have a thought of, yes, I'm in control, and I did this, and I'm the alive one, doesn't mean that it's true. A thought can say whatever it wants to. a brain can inhabit every thought that it wants to. I can say I'm whatever, a giant with butterfly wings, but that doesn't make it true. So you see how your brain is telling you that it is the consciousness that is living inside of you, that spark that you really are, but it cannot really prove that, and it did never prove that, because you identified with it. You never questioned your own brain, and this is why it can tell you whatever it wants to. It can tell you, I'm the consciousness, I'm the alive spark within you, and you just perceive it, and then you think it's you. But your perception, again, is not you. You're the perceiver of perception. You get this? I think you're starting to get this idea. So you're basically free now. Yay! Yeah, I know, like, until this truth dawns on you and you begin to integrate it, you still feel trapped, because you think like, whoa, what am I then if I'm not that? Because all your life you've been thinking you're your brain, and it's like a brain thinking that now, but you're still watching that. You're watching your brain saying, oh, I'm this and I'm that. And the thing is that conscious perceiver is completely silent. It doesn't say anything, it doesn't feel anything, it doesn't attach to anything. But it just is, and it just perceives. And when you feel that, there's no other liberation like that. Because imagine all your life you've been in this little defined circle that you call yourself, which is made out of your thoughts and emotions, and suddenly you see that you're that thing around that this little box exists in. And this is basically what we call love. It's a feeling of openness, of expansion, and it is the feeling that arises as soon as we realize what we are not. Because that thing that you are cannot realize it. You can only be it and know it. So yeah, this is basically the universe and God and life explained. There's more to it, but also less, because it's actually not about words and not about an explanation and a definition. I really encourage you to rather go into the feeling side of it, and seeing how it can free you up emotionally, because this is what matters. It doesn't matter if your mind is free, and don't go out there now, oh, I'm gonna bust the illusion with everyone and tell them of what they are. Notice that this is still the brain. This is still thought arising. Just stay in presence, because this is the only thing that is eternal about you. So if physical matter also has consciousness, that means you can never die. Your mind and your ego and your survival instincts and fears and emotions can die, but this conscious perceiver inside of you can never die. It can't. How? How could something that is dead come alive and then die again?